Hello, class. Today we're going to be going over Chapter 21, Reproductive Systems. The reproductive system of each parent produces the reproductive cells called gametes, needed to form the offspring. These gametes, called an ovum in a woman from the ovary, and sperm from the testes in a male, fuse during the process of fertilization. The new offspring cell that results is called the zygote. After many complicated and amazing developmental stages, the zygote ultimately develops into a new individual. So let's talk about other stuff we're going to learn here. Discuss the process of sexual reproduction and describe the common structural and functional characteristics of the typical male and female systems. Describe the structure and function of the male reproductive system, including the gross and microscopic structure of the gonads, the developmental steps in spermatogenesis, and the primary functions of sex hormones. Describe the structure and function of the female reproductive system, including the gross and microscopic structure of the gonads and the functions of the sex hormones. Identify and discuss the phases of the menstrual cycle and correlate each phase with its occurrence in a typical 28-day cycle. So, sexual reproduction, producing offspring. Sexual reproduction requires two parent organisms, a male and a female. The advantage is a new mixture of genes in each genetic offspring increases the variety of genetic characteristics in the population. The reproductive system of each parent produces the sex or reproductive cells called gametes. Now the ovum, which is the gamete from the female from the ovary, and sperm is the gamete from the testes in the male. The ovum and the sperm fuse during the process of fertilization. The new offspring is then called the zygote. This zygote ultimately develops into a new individual. Asexual reproduction is when an organism reproduces and it requires only one parent. Sexual maturity and the ability to reproduce occur at puberty. Male and female systems. Common general structure and function can be identified between the systems in both sexes. Systems adapted for the development of sperm or ova, followed by successful fertilization, development, and the birth of offspring. Sex hormones in both genders is important in the development of what we call secondary sexual characteristics. This could be feminizing or masculizing, and normal reproductive system activity. So in the male reproductive system, the essential organs of reproduction is the gonads known as the testes. That is the essential organ, which produces sex cells called sperm or spermatozoa. Accessory organs of male reproduction include ducts, sex glands, and external genitalia. Ducts are passageways that carry sperm from the testes to the exterior. Sex glands produce protective and nutrient solution for the sperm. And the external genitalia includes the penis and the scrotum. So, this is the organization of the male reproductive system. So in this, we're going to be talking about these different vas ductus deferens, the bulbourethral or Cowper glands, prostate gland, ejaculatory duct. We'll be talking about all of this momentarily. Now, the order for sperm to exit the body is from first the epididymis, then the sperm goes into the ductus deferens, then through the ejaculatory duct, and finally out through the urethra and out of the body. And that is a very important process to remember. So testes, remember, testes are the gonads of men. The structure and location, the testes are located in the scrotum. The scrotum, the testes hang down in the scrotum to lower the temperature. So in lower temperatures, they hang lower, and then in colder temperatures, they will actually kind of shrivel and go up towards the body to help keep the temperature regulated in the scrotum. The testes are covered by a tunica albuginea, which divides the testes into lobules containing seminiferous tubules. Interstitial cells, very important, the interstitial cells actually produce the hormone testosterone. Now, this is an example of the tubules of the testes and the epididymis. So you can see the testes goes the epididymis up into the vas deferens, which helps with that summary of how the semen, where the order goes from the testes through and out the body. Now, the functions of the testes is spermatogenesis. That is the process of sperm production. Sperm precursor cells are called spermatogonia. Meiosis produces primary spermacide, which forms 4 spermatids with 23 chromosomes. Spermatozoa are highly specialized cells. The head contains genetic material. The acrosome contains enzymes to assist sperm in the penetration of the ovum, and mitochondria in the midpiece provides energy for movement. It functions by the production of testosterone by the interstitial cells. Testosterone is the masculinizing hormone, and it promotes the development of male accessory organs. It also promotes and maintains development of the male accessory organs, and it stimulates protein anabolism and development of muscle strength. So this is an example of spermatogenesis. I do not expect you to have this memorized, but in the chapter of cell division that you've been over, you can see where we end up with 46 germ cells. So you get 23 chromosomes from dad, 23 from mom. But you can kind of see how the sperm have the 23 to go up. You got the different cell division in here. Now, the epididymis is a single coiled tube that's about 6 meters or 20 feet in length. It lies along the top and behind the testes and the scrotum. Sperm mature and develop the capacity for motility as they pass through the epididymis. The vas deferens, known as the ductus deferens, receives sperm from the epididymis and transports them from the scrotal sac through the abdominal cavity. Passes through the inguinal canal. It joins the duct of the seminal vesicle to form the ejaculatory duct. The vas deferens then joins the duct from the seminal vesicle to form the ejaculatory duct. The ejaculatory duct passes into the prostate gland, which wraps around it and permits sperm to empty into the urethra, which eventually passes through the penis and opens to the exterior at the urinary meatus. So the accessory glands for men. So semen. Semen is a mixture of sperm and secretions of accessory sex glands. It averages 3 to 5 milliliters per ejaculation, and each milliliter contains about 100 million sperm. It is mind-blowing. Semen is slightly alkaline and thus protects the sperm from the acidic environment of the female reproductive tract or the vagina. Seminal vesicles are pouch-like glands that produce about 60% of the seminal fluid volume. The secretion is yellowish, thick, and rich in fructose to provide energy needed by sperm for motility or movement. The prostate gland is shaped like a donut and located below the bladder. Their urethra passes through this gland. Secretion presents 30% of seminal fluid volume. It's thin and milk-colored. It activates sperm and is needed for ongoing sperm motility. Now, the bulbourethral or Cowper glands. These resemble peas in size and shape, and they're just below the prostate. It secretes a mucus-like fluid constituting less than 5% of seminal fluid volume that empties into the penile portion of the urethra. The functions of the bulbourethral or Cowper glands is the alkalinity of fluid is used to neutralize the acid in the male urethra and the female vagina. It lubricates the urethra to protect sperm from friction damage during ejaculation, and it adds to the external lubrication of the penis needed for intercourse. Now the male external genitals. This contains the penis and scrotum called genitalia. The penis has 3 columns of erectile tissue, 2 dorsal columns called corpora cavernosa, and 1 ventral column surrounding the urethra called the corpus spongiosum. The gland's penis is covered by foreskin. It's also called the prepuce. Surgical removal of the foreskin is called circumcision. Most circumcisions are elective and performed at the discretion of the parents. However, they can be done later in life. The scrotum is internally divided into 2 sacs by a septum. Now, the female reproductive system. So the organs are classified as essential or accessory. The only essential organs or gonads are the ovaries, which produce sex cells or gametes called ova. The accessory organs of the female reproductive system includes ducts or modified ducts. This includes the oviducts or fallopian tubes, the uterus and the vagina, sex glands, including the breast, and then we have external genitals. You can see the organization of the female reproductive system here. I want you to notice that the ovaries are not connected to the fallopian tubes or the uterine tubes. There's little fimbriae, little finger-like projections, but they are not directly connected. So the ovaries, these are paired glands weighing about 3 grams each. They resemble large almonds. They are attached to ligaments in the pelvic cavity on each side of the uterus. The microscopic structure of ovaries are as follows. Ovarian follicles contain an oocyte, which is an immature sex cell. There's about 1 million that we're born with. Primary follicles, about 400,000 at puberty, are covered with granulosa cells. Then about 350 to 500 mature follicles, often called Graafian follicles. These ovulate during the reproductive lifetime. Secondary follicles have a hollow chamber called the antrum. And then the corpus luteum forms after ovulation. This corpus luteum is so important because it becomes a hormone-secreting granular structure. So here you can see what's going on in the ovaries. And again, you see that they're detached from the fallopian tubes. So the ovary, you can see the blood supply, all of that. You can see where we got primary follicles that turn into follicular cells, secondary follicles, granulosa cells, becomes this antrum, which contains an oocyte. This is the mature follicle or the Graafian follicle. At this point, then ovulation occurs. And the ovulation, it goes, one ovum or one egg goes out And then the fimbriae, little finger-like projections off of the fallopian tubes, grab it and pull it and suck it into the fallopian tube. Now, after ovulation, you've got this corpus luteum here. Again, this turns into a hormone secreting cell. It's got blood vessels. Then there's secretion of progesterone by the corpus luteum, and it starts to degenerate and stuff gets reabsorbed into the bloodstream. So the functions, oogenesis. This is the meiotic cell division, produces daughter cells with equal chromosomes, numbers of 23, but unequal cytoplasm. The ovum is large, polar bodies are small, and they start to degenerate. Ovaries are very important in the production of estrogen and progesterone. Granulosa cells surrounding the oocyte in the mature and growing follicles produce estrogen. The corpus luteum produces progesterone. Very important. Estrogen causes the development and the maintenance of secondary sex characteristics that are the more feminine features. And progesterone stimulates secretory activity of the uterine epithelium and assists estrogen in initiating menses. Now, the uterine or fallopian tubes, also called the oviducts, all three names apply, extend about 10 centimeters from the uterus into the abdominal cavity. Expanded distal end surrounded by fimbriae, which are those finger-like projections. Once the uterine tube, the ovum begins its journey into the uterus. The mucosal lining of the tube is directly continuous with the lining of the abdominal cavity. Now the uterus is composed of the body, which is the center part. The fundus is the top of the uterus, and the cervix is located down. It's the bottom of the uterus where the vagina attaches. The changes in the uterine lining repeat themselves and are spoken of as a menstrual cycle. Infections of the vagina or the uterus, such as gonorrhea, may pass into the abdominal wall via the uterine tube, where they can become life-threatening. Now, the uterus lies in the pelvic cavity just behind the urinary bladder. The myometrium is the muscular layer of the uterus. The endometrium is the inner layer or the lining of the uterus, and this is what is lost in menstruation, also known as menses or your period. Menopause is the end of the repetitive menstrual cycles, and this begins around 45 to 50 years of age. Now, the vagina, this is a distensible tube. It can distend. It's about 10 centimeters long. It is located between the urinary bladder and the rectum in the pelvis. This receives the penis during sexual intercourse and is the birth canal for the normal delivery of a baby at the end of a term pregnancy. The vagina is an accessory or supportive sex gland. So here's the uterus. You can see the top of the uterus, which is the fundus. The body is the middle part, and the cervix is at the end where the vagina attaches to the uterus. Again, the endometrium is the inner layer or the lining. This is what's shed during menstruation. Then you have the myometrium, which is the muscle layer, and then the outside is the perimetrium there. Now, accessory glands in the women, or the woman, is the vestibular glands known as Bartholin glands. These secrete mucus lubricating fluid, may contribute to lubrication during intercourse. Ducts open between the labia minora. Then we have breast. Breasts are located over the pectoral muscles of the thorax. Size is determined by fat quantity more than the amount of glandular or milk secreting tissue. Lactiferous ducts drain at the nipple, which is surrounded by pigmented areola. Lymphatic drainage is essential in the spread of cancer cells to other bodies of this area. Remember, the breasts have a lot of lymphatic lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes very close around it. Here's the lateral view of the breast. You can see the alveolus, the duct, the lactiferous duct, nipples, lobes of the breast tissues. There's a lot of fat in there, so you can see all of that. Now, the external genitals of the female are the vulva and the perineum. The vulva consists of several structures, which includes the mons pubis, the clitoris, the external urinary meatus, labia minora, the hymen, openings of vestibular gland ducts, the orifice or opening of the vagina, and the labia majora. Then we have the perineum. This is the area between the vaginal opening and the anus. Oftentimes, they have to cut this, do a surgical cut during childbirth, and we call this an episiotomy. So here's the external genitals of the female. Notice the urethra is not part of the external genitals. The urethra is part of the bladder. Now let's talk about the menstrual cycle. This involves many changes in the uterus, ovaries, vagina, and breast. The length of the menstrual cycle is about every 28 days, and it varies from month to month among individuals and in the same individual. Now there are phases. The first is the menstrual phase. This is about the first 4 or 5 days of the menstrual cycle. It varies somewhat, but it's characterized by sloughing of bits of endometrium, which is the uterine lining, with bleeding. Then you enter the proliferatory phase. These are days between the end of the menses and the secretory phase. It varies in length. The proliferative phase, the shorter the cycle, the shorter the proliferative phase. The longer the cycle, the longer the proliferative phase. And in the proliferative phase, estrogen is at its highest level. Now, during the secretory phase, these are the days between ovulation and the beginning of the next menses or menstrual cycle. The secretory phase is about 14 days before the next menses. It is characterized by further thickening of the endometrium and secretion by its glands in preparation for implantation of a fertilized ovum. Combined actions of the anterior pituitary hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone cause ovulation. Sudden sharp decrease in estrogens and progesterone bring on menstruation if pregnancy does not occur. It is during this secretory phase that the uterine lining is at its thickest and the ovary secretes its highest level of progesterone because of the corpus luteum being formed. Remember, the corpus luteum secretes progesterone. It acts as an endocrine organ. So this is the 28-day menstrual cycle. So again, menses or menstrual periods, days 1 through 5. Small patches of dead cells and uterine sloughing starts. And the bleeding. Around day 6 to 13 somewhere is the proliferative phase. This is where epithelial cells reproduce, repairs the uterine lining. Around day 14 is where ovulation occurs. The ovum is released from the ovary, moves into the uterine or the fallopian tubes for possible fertilization. About the end of day 14, going into 15, is the secretory phase. This is where the lining of the uterus prepares for pregnancy. That is, if implantation of the fertilized ovum occurs by growing thicker, secreting and developing greater blood supply. And on the last day, the blood supply decreases greatly, causes some lining in the cells to die, which leads into our menstrual period if we do not become pregnant. Again, this is a good view. You can see where the hormones are going on. And I want to note there's multiple things going on at one time in the menstrual cycle. You have the menstrual cycle itself that we've talked about, which is menses, proliferative phase, secretory phase, back to menses again. At the same time, the ovarian hormone cycle is occurring, which you can see that, and the ovarian cycle. So the ovary is secreting the ova and it's ovulating, and the gonadotropins or the hormones are going on here. So you can see where for our menstrual cycles, there is a lot going on at one time. So ovulation typically occurs 14 days before the next menses begins. The timing of ovulation has great practical importance because of the possibility of fertilization. Most sperm retain their fertilizing power for only 24 to 72 hours after being deposited into the female reproductive tract. A woman's fertile period lasts only a few days each month. A woman's fertile period is typically 3 to 5 days before and no later than 24 hours after ovulation has occurred. Now, the control of the menstrual cycle is through the secretion of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, GnRH, that stimulates the secretion of follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. Ovulation occurs because of the combined actions of the two anterior pituitary hormones. Birth control pills that contain estrogen substances actually suppress the follicle stimulating hormone secretion. So in summary, the reproductive systems in both sexes revolve around the production of reproductive cells or gametes. The production of sex hormones is required for the development of secondary sex characteristics and for normal reproductive functions in both sexes. Both men and women have similar structures to accomplish complementary functions. So that is the end of chapter 21. Go study, read your chapter. And again, repetition is key. And good luck.